I woke up to the sound of birds outside my window and the soft morning light filtering through the white curtains of my bedroom. It was my 74th birthday. I sat at the kitchen table for a while, holding a mug of coffee between my hands, waiting for the phone to ring. But time moved slowly, like the drops falling from the kettle I had forgotten to cover. Silence spread through the house, filling every corner. No messages came, no phone calls, not even a simple, "Happy birthday, Mom." The photos of my 3 children were still there, resting on the shelf in the living room, smiling at me with faces from another time. But the truth was, they had moved on with their lives in faraway cities, too busy to remember that this day still mattered to me. 2 days later, I carefully folded my floral dresses, the ones I used to wear while tending to the garden in spring, and packed them into an old suitcase, the kind with thick fabric and worn edges softened by the years. I caught the morning bus and sat by the window, as if searching for answers in the passing scenery. The road seemed to speak to me. Every bend, every lone tree by the roadside brought back memories of when life felt simpler, and so did I. The overcast sky made everything feel slower, deeper. I arrived in the small town of Willow Creek in the middle of the afternoon. Arfpasin. Country air carried that familiar scent of damp earth, freshly baked bread, and time standing still. The town square was still there, with the same old gazebo at its center. The church still held its bell tower high, and the main street looked almost untouched since the last time I'd seen it. It was as if time had passed over this place without really changing it. My sister Helen was waiting for me by the white fence on the porch, her calm smile framed by gray hair pulled back in a messy bun. She'd always been 2 years older than me, and even when we were kids, she had that motherly way about her, something she never outgrew. When she saw me, she walked over, her eyes shining with tears. She said it was time I came home. We hugged for a long while. It wasn't just a reunion, it was healing. That night, after dinner, we sat on the porch with blankets over our legs. I told Helen how my birthday had been forgotten, how the silence from my children was growing heavier with each passing year. She didn't interrupt, she just listened. Quietly, she reached over and held my hand with a gentleness only she could offer. Later, while she slept, I stayed outside, listening to the crickets and gazing up at the sky. For the first time in a long while, I felt something flicker inside me. Like a candle had been lit in a dark room. Before going to bed, I left a slice of cornbread on the kitchen table, my own recipe, one I make every year on my birthday, even if no one comes. I made it out of habit, out of longing, out of a thin thread of hope. I ate in silence, trying not to let the absence sour the sweetness. That night, before going to bed, I found an old letter from Helen tucked between the pages of a book. It was from a few months ago, but somehow her words carried a different weight now. She wrote that she missed me, that the village market was still beautiful, full of flowers, music, and that childhood scent in the air. She said time felt lighter, out here, and she asked me to come visit. I looked around the guest room I was staying in. The silence there was comforting, not like the silence in my house. There, it pressed in on me. Here, it felt like an invitation. And I asked myself how long it had been since I'd felt truly alive. Maybe it was time to leave behind the place where everything had come to a standstill. On Saturday morning, Helen woke me up early with the same cheerful energy she'd always had. She said it was market day, and I couldn't miss it. "It's the day of colors, sweet smells, and happy memories," she said while brewing coffee. I put on one of my light-colored dresses, wrinkled from time, and pinned my hair back carefully. I added a flower-shaped brooch that my husband had given me years ago. My heart was still guarded, but something quiet inside me longed to crack a window open. We walked together to the town center. The market had spread out across the square like a living painting, Stalls draped with colorful fabrics, cheerful voices echoing through the air, fruit stacked like works of art, and the sweet smell of blackberry jam floating all around. While Helen picked out fresh vegetables, I wandered slowly through the aisles, taking it all in with eyes that hadn't marveled at anything in a long while. Children ran past with balloons, older women offered handmade cheeses, and in the distance a small group played violins and an accordion. The music felt like it had been pulled straight from my childhood, and then I saw him. At the corner of one of the market aisles, there was a simple booth overflowing with color. Pots of daisies, chrysanthemums, lavender, jasmine, all neatly arranged, each with little handwritten signs. Behind the wooden table stood a man with white hair and a scruffy beard, quietly tending to the flowers. His eyes, though weathered by time, still held a spark of youth. There was something about him that drew me in, a silent, yet unmistakable sense of recognition. It wasn't until he lifted one of the lavender pots and saw me that the memory rushed back all at once. He said my name, and I knew his voice before. My mind even registered his face. It was Michael, the same Michael I danced with at summer festivals, the one who gave me my first kiss behind the old chapel when we were 17. He had left without a word, off to chase an education somewhere far away, and never came back. Until now. I stood there, frozen, my heart thudding in a rhythm I hadn't felt in decades. He told me he never forgot me, that he carried a memory of me that no amount of time could erase. It took me a while to say anything. The emotion clung to my chest like a knot, and when I finally spoke, I asked why he had disappeared like that, why he never sent even a single letter. He looked down and said he had left out of fear. He wanted to prove something to the world, he said, but in the process, he walked away from the one thing that truly mattered, me. I didn't feel anger, just the ache of an old wound rising slowly to the surface, like an ember still glowing beneath the ashes. There was something oddly healing about hearing the truth, an answer that had never come until now, and somehow it still made sense. He asked how I'd been. I told him I'd been widowed 6 years ago, and ever since then, I'd just been existing, moving through life without truly living. Michael offered me a wooden chair beside the flower stand. He said he'd make hibiscus tea. He'd never managed to like coffee, he confessed with a smile, and joked that he was terrible at brewing it anyway. I smiled. I sat down, and we stayed there, both of us suspended in that quiet blend of surprise and nostalgia that seemed to fill the air around us. While the tea warmed on a small portable burner, we talked slowly, as if the years between us had been nothing more than a pause, not a vast chasm. I spoke about my children, about the grandchildren I only knew through pictures on social media, and about the emptiness that settled into my home once the sound of visitors had faded. He listened carefully. He didn't interrupt, he just listened, with that kind of gaze that makes you feel truly seen. A rare thing these days. Michael told me he never married, that he'd been living off his flowers since moving back to Willow Creek 10 years ago. He said he prefers talking to plants because they don't ask for explanations, only care and time. He told me lavender soothes him, but daisies always reminded him of me. I looked away. I couldn't tell if it was the heat of the tea or the weight of old memories that made my cheeks feel so warm. When the sun had begun casting a golden glow across the square, I said goodbye, my chest tightening just a little. I told him I'd come back the next day to buy flowers for Helen. He said he'd be waiting, maybe for more than just flowers. I simply smiled and let the promise linger in the air like the scent of rain-soaked earth. That night, Helen gave me a knowing smile when I walked through the door. She didn't ask anything. She only said my face looked more alive. I didn't confirm it, but deep down, I knew something inside me had shifted, as if the hardened ground was finally giving way to a seed. The next morning, I went to the market earlier, not with the steps of a casual visitor, but with the quiet intention of someone who belonged. Helen noticed, and with a playful look, she asked if I was going back for the flowers or for the man who sold them. I pretended not to hear her, but the question echoed inside me. I already knew the answer. Michael was already waiting. He wiped off a chair for me, adjusted a scarf around his neck, and handed me a small bouquet of lavender with a few sprigs of rosemary. He said rosemary is known to help with memory, but he liked to believe it was better suited for hope. I sat beside him and started helping. At first, just wrapping flower pots, then jotting down orders, and before I realized it, I was there among the flowers, as if I had belonged in that space all along. Michael was gentle. He had a way of occupying space that never felt overwhelming. He didn't talk much, and when he did, every word seemed carefully chosen. Sometimes, we just sat there side by side in silence. But it wasn't the kind of silence I had come to know so well. It was a silence full of presence, a comfortable kind of quiet. One day, he asked if I had always liked flowers. I told him I had, but that over time, life filled up with other priorities: children, the house, grief, and somewhere along the way I forgot about myself. He looked at me with a tenderness that caught me off guard, as if in every wrinkle on my face, he saw everything I had been, and everything I still could be. People around town began to notice me at his side. Someone passing by the stall once commented that Michael's new assistant was quite lovely. He laughed and replied that he wasn't going to let this flower slip away again. I dropped my gaze to the ground like a teenager receiving her first compliment. And in that moment, I realized it was still possible to be seen, to be wanted, to be a woman. The routine at the market transformed my days. There was no more room for that old feeling of being forgotten in a house filled with framed memories. Mornings began to carry new meaning. The scent of the market, the sound of the town waking up, Michael's soft "good morning." It all became a different kind of calendar. One that felt tender, alive. I learned to care for the plants with a kind of reverence I had never known. To replant gently, to understand that every flower has its own rhythm. And slowly, I began to understand that I did too. Helen noticed the change. She said my eyes looked brighter, softer. I started looking at myself in the mirror with curiosity, not just out of habit. One afternoon, as we sat on the porch drinking tea, our feet tucked under blankets and the wind stirring dry leaves through the garden, I whispered a quiet confession, that I didn't know it was still possible to feel this way, alive, wanting to get dressed up, to stroll through the square, to talk, to be a woman, in the fullest and most forgotten sense of the word. Helen took my hand and told me it had always been possible, that I had just been waiting for the right moment to bloom again. But as with any blooming, beauty often arrives hand in hand with doubt and nostalgia. Not exactly for my children, who still didn't call, didn't ask, didn't notice I was gone, but for the idea of belonging, for the feeling of having roots somewhere, roots I may have let dry up from neglect. During a brief phone call with my oldest son, I mentioned that I was traveling. On the other end, he asked, almost puzzled, why I had gone alone. I replied, with the calm only time can teach us, that I went because no one came, that I was a person too. He didn't respond right away. Then he simply said he'd call me some other time, and hung up. I stared at the phone like someone watching a door slowly close. But strangely, instead of sadness, I felt a quiet relief, as if the chain that had bound me to the role of always being the available mother had finally broken. I realized that not every absence deserves a return. Later that day, while we were putting away the flower pots at closing time, Michael looked at me sweetly and asked if I had ever thought about staying for good. I smiled. I told him I thought about it every single day. In the days that followed, I began walking more around town. I started to notice the little details I used to ignore: the dog napping in the shade outside the pharmacy, the kids playing marbles like I did when I was young, the older woman selling warm apple fritters on the corner. Everything felt welcoming, as if the place itself was gently telling me there was still room for me. Michael remained by my side, with his calming presence. We'd walk along the dirt roads, and while he talked about his plants, I listened to my own heart trying to learn. A new rhythm. One cloudy afternoon, while we were arranging daisies at the stall, he told me he wished I would plant roots here. With him. I stayed quiet for a few seconds. The invitation wasn't just sweet, it was real. I told him it wasn't that simple, that I had a house, a history, children. And he said something I'll never forget, that my house may have forgotten me, but I didn't have to forget myself. Those words stayed with me like seeds. I called a neighbor and asked her to check my mail. I spoke with the building manager and casually mentioned the idea of selling my apartment. I opened my suitcase and realized I didn't miss a single thing I had left behind. But the night still brought questions. Sometimes, lying in Helen's guest room, I'd wonder if it was too late to start over. If all of this was just a beautiful illusion, a temporary comfort. I feared that Michael, gentle as he was, might one day grow tired of me too. And in the tangle of those thoughts, for the first time in many years, I prayed. In a whisper, with my eyes closed and my heart open, I asked God to show me if there was still time, not just to live, but to truly live, to feel, to love again. The next morning, I woke up with my heart still wrapped in the prayer from the night before. As I stepped out of the guest room, I found a note slipped under the door. The handwriting was his, steady and simple. It said he had picked the first dahlias of the season, that they were for me, and that he'd be waiting at the stall, just like always. That sentence felt like a silent answer from heaven. Simple. Sweet, exact. I put on one of my favorite dresses, a linen blue one I used to save for special occasions. Strangely, it hadn't seen the sunlight in years. I didn't wear it to impress anyone. I wore it because, that day, I wanted to feel beautiful for myself. I left before Helen woke up. I walked to the market with light steps, as if my soul was leading the way. When I arrived, Michael was already there, arranging flower pots on the wooden table. He saw me and smiled, then handed me a single dahlia wrapped in craft paper, like someone offering more than a flower. A possibility. He said, there was cinnamon tea today, and I replied, with a steady voice, that I had a decision too. Right there, among daisies and sunflowers, I told him I was staying, that I'd sell my apartment, that I wanted to live in this quiet town where the rhythm of life welcomed me like a warm blanket. That I wanted this new life, and I wanted him, gently, like the flowers we planted together. In the right time, Michael simply embraced me. It was a quiet hug, full of presence. It didn't ask for promises or declarations. It simply said, I'm here. In the days that followed, I contacted a realtor. I talked to Helen about renting a small place nearby. I officially began helping at the flower stall. I arranged bouquets, took down orders, and even started to learn the names of our regulars. At night, I wrote in an old notebook I found in Helen's cabinet. There, I recorded the small daily miracles I used to overlook. Today, I learned to care for violets. They like shade and silence, just like me. Michael told me chrysanthemums endure the cold. That's why they're flowers of memory. I bought pruning shears. Never thought a new life would begin like this, cutting off what no longer blooms. Yes, there was still fear. But now, it came hand in hand with courage, like two fingers, intertwined, crossing the street together. Soon came the flower festival, a tradition in town I vaguely remembered from childhood. The square burst with colors, bunting, soft music. Michael set up a special booth with custom arrangements, handwritten note cards and a sign I painted in watercolor, flowers that speak for us. I discovered I had a talent for it. I painted boxes, tied ribbons, crafted bouquets as if stitching memories. And Michael watched me silently, sometimes handing me a glass of water, other times telling me, in the simplest way, that I looked beautiful, and it wasn't just because of the flowers. A little girl walked past the stall with her mother and pointed at me, saying she wanted a bouquet like the one the flower lady had, because I looked like a garden fairy. I laughed on the outside, but inside, something lit up. It had been so long since anyone saw me like that, with wonder. That evening, there was music in the square. Michael asked me to dance. I hesitated, afraid of breaking the spell. But he extended his hand and said, with the conviction of someone who plants what they hope to harvest, that I could trust him. I said yes. And there, under the soft glow of lights, we danced as if time had rewound. As if there were no losses, no absences, no forgettings, just two aging bodies, alive, with stories in their bones and hope in their eyes. He whispered that he never imagined getting a second chance. And now that it had come, he didn't intend to waste it. I rested my head on his shoulder. The music played on, but the world seemed to slow, like a deep breath after tears. For the first time in many years, I was dancing, unafraid of tomorrow. Months later, I moved into a small white cottage with blue shutters and a tiny garden out front. I planted roses, hung wind chimes on the porch, and every morning I walked to the market with my notebook, my straw hat, and a heart at peace. I began writing short messages for each bouquet. One of them became well known around town. For the woman who lives alone, as I once did. You are still a garden, even if the world sees you as late autumn. One day, Helen asked me if I'd go back if my children called. I answered with dirt on my hands and a calm smile. Of course I'd answer. I'll always be a mother. But now, before anything else, I'm Margaret. And that afternoon, while watering my daisies, I wrote the final line in my notebook. I wasn't born to be remembered. Every now and then, I was born to bloom completely and never forget myself again. If this story touched your heart the way it touched mine when I lived it, I invite you to give this video a like. It's such a small gesture, but it helps us tremendously to keep sharing real, heartfelt stories full of hope. Just like this one. And if you're not yet part of our community, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Here, every story is a seed, and with your support, we can help them bloom farther than ever. Thank you for being here. See you in the next story.